We're going to get to our first real presenter. We have Dave Coffman from Res is going to speak and talk a little bit about what's happening with restoration in former dam areas. So Dave Coffman's presented here before. He always brings some really great insight into what's been happening, and just really want to appreciate all your efforts in helping get the project through.
Thanks, Randy. Thank you, Randy.
Yep.
Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Randy, for the introduction. I've worked in a lot of river basins, and the amount of monitoring work and data collected in this river basin is world class. It's outstanding. And so, from us who are kind of tasked with this stewardship of these former reservoir footprints for a little while, the data that are collected really help inform above and beyond what could have been or what was intended, I think, or what the monitoring was intended to be, to look at the recovery of the system over time. And so we're kind of at the precipice here. We've done the world's largest dam removal project. We're now working on one of the larger restoration projects that's been seen in the country, but there's bigger stuff out there. And so the data that y'all are collecting are what's going to be looked at as, okay, does dam removal and restoration at this large of a scale work? Does it benefit things? I think all of us who have been even remotely involved in this process over the past year have seen, yeah, we can say, yes, it is providing a benefit. What exactly that benefit is going to be over the long term, I think we're all waiting to see very patiently. But so far, I know I personally have been very surprised, but also very happy with how things have gone so far. So I'm going to run through a couple of slides here. It's a little bit on a look back at 2024 through today, and then a look forward through the rest of this year. Following that, Caitlin's going to come up and give a talk on some of the sediment monitoring that we've been doing. And so a reminder to folks that the restoration for this project had a handful of purposes, but one of the primary purposes was creation of a diverse native vegetation palette covering these formerly inundated lands to lock reservoir sediment in place. That's a key component of the restoration. Key thing to keep in mind as we talk about restoration of these former reservoir sites. The idea was keep reservoir sediment that's deposited in the uplands on the uplands. And then the other really cool stuff like in-stream habitat, channel restoration, and all that stuff that goes along with a big ecological restoration project like this. But number one priority was keep the sediment where the sediment sits, not have these reservoir footprints be a long-term source of fine-grained sediment to the root. And so lots of folks, raise your hand if you've seen a presentation on the dam removal project in the past. Great. There's a new org chart for the project. You'll see a big blank spot where Kiewit used to sit. So Kiewit, the dam removal contractor, is finished. They finished their scope of work. They have completely demobbed off the site as of last November. And so what we've done is gone through and restructured the org chart so there's no mistaking who has responsibility for things going wrong from this point out. From the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, McMillan, who was the owner's rep during the dam removal process, is still on the project team, but their primary responsibility right now is recreation site construction, with rec sites being scheduled to open sometime in June or July. AECOM is still on board doing all the cultural resource work along with tribal partners. And then Res is the Habitat Restoration Contractor, with our main subcontractors being the Yreka tribe, Root tribe, and Shasta Indian Nation. So just, there we go. Advances here before there. I show these slides as a reminder. Well, a lot of attention has been put on these yellow boxes, which are considered our high priority restoration tributary. Let's not forget, there is still this massive revegetation effort, 2,200 acres. You round up to include all the acreage that was impacted during the dam removal construction phase, and probably looking at more like 2,500 acres of native vegetation restoration. Then with very heavy emphasis in these yellow boxes. And so, as I mentioned, restoration was meant to hold reservoir sediment in place. The period of time when that sediment was most apt or most available for upland erosion and transport into the sediment was before it dried and hardened. That period of time also happened to be the most beneficial time to get vegetation established. So we started the reservoir footprint restoration process a number of days following the initiation of drawdown in these reservoirs. And so we had crews out getting native vegetation seed on the ground, native seed on the ground within days following the initial drawdown of Iron Gate, and then we bounced and continued on up as the different reservoirs began to lower. And so these photos are, the one on the left is Beaver Creek in former Copco Lake. And this was last August when we were placing the large helicopter wood in the tributary. So not only did we get native vegetation established out here, but the other objective was to promote or enable fish passage, right? So if you had to think about, Res is the habitat contractor, but on behalf of the Renewal Corporation, the primary project components remaining are establishment of sustainable native vegetation, but also fish passage. There was a concern, and still is to an extent, that reservoir sediment or other unknown man-made factors would affect fish passage on the Klamath River from anywhere down around nearly I-5 all the way up through the project corridor or the project reach, the hydroelectric reach to the upper end of former J.C. Bull Reservoir, and then these tributaries also. But also a number of tributary mouths. So fish passage was one of the major components of the project. And the goal of placing some wood in these tributaries was not only are we working separately to promote fish passage, but the wood that was placed in the tributaries provided immediate habitat benefit to fish that did happen to come past Iron Gate Dam. And get up into these tributaries. It turned out we probably did some good stuff with getting that wood out there. But I think the latest number I've heard, and somebody else has more recent stuff than I do, 6,000 adult fall shrimp past an Iron Gate Dam. Anybody else have an updated number for that?
I wouldn't call it fall Chinook. It's from the sowing. So salmon sized.
Man, I like that.
On there. So
Salmon size, okay. For the audience on the phone, 6,000 salmon-sized fish. Yeah, like that. Thank you. But anyway, large wood was placed, vegetation went down, and here we've just got kind of our montage, our photo montage of things that were accomplished last year. And I'll dive into a few more of these in a little more detail, but some will recall the sediment evacuation work that was done primarily on Jenny Creek, where we went in and reconfigured a channel that was in a very unstable condition with multiple fish passage barriers, removed via primarily the force of flowing water, about 40,000 cubic yards of beneficial sand and gravel, got it into the flowing water where it's now back entrained into a natural sediment transport regime. Fish impediment removal, fish passage impediment removal here on the lower left-hand corner. That was an old bridge structure. It looked like on Lower Camp Creek, and there was a concrete slab that was crossing Camp Creek. This was kind of earlier in the season, but during fish passage time, which was going to be in the fall, thought was, well, if there is flow in Camp Creek, which sometimes there's not, this concrete slab is definitely going to create a barrier. So that and a couple of the abutments that were associated with that channel spanning concrete structure were removed last summer. Revegetation efforts, of course, via hand sowing with our Yreka partners, and then helicopter seeding for the areas that were just too muddy to get to. And then large wood loading that I've already discussed was primarily done with helicopters last year. And will be readdressed this year with more conventional excavation needs and placement needs. And so we've got some hot off the presses status updates from our time-lapse cameras. And what I've got here in these next few slides, which is really just restoration eye candy, is immediately post drawdown or relatively immediately post drawdown photos on the left and restoration photos on the right. These are both within the former Copco lake footprint. You can see the natives coverage, native vegetation coverage through there. The upper two photos are from Jenny Creek, so this would be somewhat river left of the Jenny Creek, on the Jenny Creek Valley, looking down towards the Jenny Creek confluence. For those of you that have been out there, there's this really neat rock feature on the Klamath River right at the Jenny Creek confluence, and that's what we're looking at here. This is Camp Creek. And so on the bottom, this is Camp Creek looking generally down valley from the left side of the valley. Then a few more, these are Iron Gate. So these are the Iron Gate narrows. We do have some time-lapse cameras set up there. One looking downstream on the top and upstream on the bottom. I mentioned Large Wood. I thought I'd give a little bit of an update on Large Wood. This is Spencer Creek. So this is up in the former J.C. Bull Reservoir footprint. Large Wood was placed. We were able to work with our partners at Green Diamond to acquire whole trees or nearly whole trees to place in this large wood placement effort. Somewhere around 1,000 trees are what we've harvested so far. We're planning to grab a few hundred more to continue to supplement work on these temporary tributaries. But here at Spencer Creek, we placed 60 to 80 trees, 60 to 80 whole trees, Doug fir, white fir, cedar, or juniper, in various configurations, in an approach to do, or attempt to do two things. One, immediate habitat, right? And it was nice, this was placement day in August, and it was very nice to be able to walk down. We started placing at the lower end of the reach and then moved to the upper end. And when the helicopter was still working about here in the mid-reach, when they were placing trees, there were already juvenile salmonids in the shade being provided by the large wood placed at the lower end of the reach. And then it was just, as you all know, a few months later, where we were able to watch Chinook salmon spawn in and around these trees. And so I'm pleased to say that as following what is still some spring runoff occurring, there's still some snowpack in the upper Spencer Creek watershed. These trees have stayed put, have rearranged themselves just a little bit, have promoted some scour and some nice places. But the objective here was to do kind of a process-based approach to restoration, where we know fish came up and made use of Spencer Creek last fall, and that doing any kind of quote unquote mechanical restoration work in there maybe be slightly more detrimental to the current condition. So we're hoping and hopeful, and we'll be monitoring to see how the creek itself responds to this large wood placement effort over the next couple of years. These are some shots at Spencer Creek before wood placement and after. Again, placement was done to divert water in different places. If anyone's been up there, you can look at Spencer Creek pretty easily and tell it is too wide. And I think the salmon photo that Randy showed was one of the first Chinook photos in Spencer Creek, and it was belly crawling because the channel itself is just too wide. And so ideally with runoff comes scouring flows that create some deeper fish passage channels. So in addition to getting restoration started, which in my notes I have our most recent numbers. Okay, to date, this is to date. So this is now 2 full seeding and planting efforts. We did one kind of at the beginning of drawdown, immediately following drawdown, beginning of 2024, and then another full round of seeding across all 2,200 acres of exposed reservoir land. Finished that up in November. We put down a little over 100,000 pounds of native seed. As of this past March, when planting bare roots and plugs was finished up at J.C. Boyle, we have about 132,000 stems in the ground, aiming for a target of 260,000. Bad news on floods, we had a whole lot of problems with plant pathogens this year. And so the project has a requirement to test a certain percentage of plants that come to the project or that are supposed to come to the project for Phytophthora. We had nearly a 50% rejection rate this year. And so these are plants that weren't able to be utilized in restoration. And what that does, not only does it put us back a little bit of time, but we also are now in the process of scrambling to collect more seeds, to grow more trees, to have stock available to grow. Let's see, around 30,000 acorns have gone in the ground. We're going to continue kind of a heavy acorn planting process. It has turned out to be fairly successful. Yeah, that's the short version of the numbers. Design progression, right? So we talked about seeding and planting, which is a big component, but then this design progression on high priority tributaries has been ongoing. Those of you that have heard me talk about design of these tributaries before, will remember this, but for those who haven't, when Res has kind of a unique approach to restoration, and we were able to bring that to the Klamath project here, where we said, yeah, we will restore tributaries to a certain condition within a set of parameters, using kind of a toolbox approach to restoration. And we'll figure out exactly how that's going to go once we can finally see our restoration sites. And so keeping in mind the project had a fixed budget to work under, we were able to develop an approach to restoration for these tributaries that fit within that fixed budget. And we're holding the cost of the project steady, because a fixed budget means there are no opportunities for additional funding. But we said, hey, look, we will achieve beneficial tributary restoration for these tributaries that no one's ever seen before. And we'll figure out exactly what that looks like following drawdown. And so that's the process that we've been going through with our partners over the past 12 months. Immediately following drawdown, started working with Condor Aviation at the Yreka tribe to collect this high resolution topography and orthoimagery data. Had 3 rounds so far. The 4th round is coming soon. The 3rd round, which was collected back in August, is what created the base elevation data for these restoration designs. And now we've gone through and applied structure grading, which is mostly floodplain grading, to get the accumulated reservoir sediment that wasn't exported out of the reservoir footprints during drawdown. We're going to mechanically grade that sediment and place it up near the valley margins, so that we can promote better floodplain channel connectivity in the long term. And then, of course, placement of those features up and down through these stream corridors. And all this work has been done lockstep with the Yreka Tribe Construction Corporation and their fisheries department, with our lead designer, Stantec, to make sure that we've got kind of a broad look at not just how we can approach the construction of restoration, but how we're already planning to implement restoration in a way that is resilient in a rapidly changing, we'll call it kind of quickly evolving landscape, right? We've got a young landscape here, and Jenny Creek was the perfect example. And so immediately following drawdown, Jenny Creek was hugging the right side of its valley. Through that assisted sediment evacuation process I mentioned earlier, the main Jenny Creek was able to get pushed over to the left valley margin, which was a little bit closer to its pre-impoundment alignment. This was the channel that Fall, Chinook, and Steelhead were able to migrate up, and then as wet weather picked up, what we found was reactivation of 3 distinct channels in the valley of Jenny Creek. And I thought, well, now what? Because the design we had at the time was for a single thread channel. But then as the water did its thing across the remaining reservoir sediments and exposed this multi-threaded channel, we thought, oh shoot, well, I think what we have here is an alluvial fan set up at this old delta deposit. And through kind of this iterative adaptive design process, identified the most likely approach to long-term success, which is let the creek keep doing what it's doing. There will be the design includes some hardening of this riffle here at the upper end to protect the road infrastructure. There's a very large wood structure planned for the outside of this bend to help protect the bluff here that supports Copco Road. But other than that, between those two features, we're looking generally at a very strong process-based restoration. Creek is going to continue to do creek things, and we will adapt over the next few years with additional vegetation and fish passage remedies if barriers end up showing themselves. So consider that a requirement for a lot more monitoring on geomorphic formant process than maybe was initially anticipated, but what really is probably the most appropriate approach to restoration on the just some brief bullet points on upcoming restoration work. We know and recognize that there is a massive population of invasive exotic vegetation on the valley rims upstream of these reservoir, upslope from these reservoir footprints. This week, we're starting our invasive species monitoring program, which is a crew of folks whose only job is to move around these reservoir footprints and identify populations of invasive vegetation that need to be addressed via either mechanical or herbicide means. Lots more data collection and field surveys, of course, with more topographic and bathymetric data collection, orthoimagery collection, so we're able to watch this landscape change over time. Restoration work, of course, in those priority tributaries. That construction should kick off in June. And lots more livestock exclusion fencing. I don't think there's anybody from Trout Unlimited here, but they have really stepped up to provide support, coordination, and funding for wildlife-friendly livestock fencing around these reservoirs as the population of feral horses really kind of ramped up over the past couple of years. And so I can't say enough and give enough thanks to our partners at Trout Unlimited for picking up that mantle and running with it. And then, of course, more fall seeding and planting. The planting efforts will continue. One of the things that pains me to say, but is 100% true, is we probably have a few hundred acres of material. And keeping in mind, this is not soil in these reservoir footprints, this is sediment. There's probably a few hundred acres out there that simply are not growing anything. And so we're going to pick up where we left off last summer with some more sediment sampling, some more lab analysis to try to tell us what in the world is going on in some of these places where initial sediment testing showed soil pHs in the 3s in some of these spots. Yeah. And so kind of kicking around some ideas on maybe what caused that, but then also what we may be able to do about it over time to make sure we've got this nice complete coverage of native vegetation. Project partners, of course, and then a big thank you. The story map, if folks have not seen the story map yet, the QR code that's here on the bottom of this page, and then of course the slide deck that Randy posts on the KBMP website will have this link. Keeps it relatively frequent updates. I won't say real time, but nearly real time updates on restoration status on the project. And with that, I'm wrapped. Sure.
Dave, is there going to be restoration on these trips above the lake footprint?
So the question was, are there going to be restoration on the tributaries outside the former reservoir footprints? The quick answer is yes, but also not by the KRC team. There's a group that's come together. Somebody help me with this acronym, K3RP. Yes? Okay. Klamath River, anyway, it's a coalition of folks that have come together to look at and start tackling restoration initiatives on these tributaries outside the former reservoir footprints.
Thank you.
I've got a quick question.
Sure.
The estimated volume of sediment behind the reservoirs, what's your guess is a percentage of how much went downstream and how much is being stabilized in place?
I am looking at Caitlin.
Ballpark.
Really rough ballpark, maybe a third of it.
Third went downstream.
Yeah, which is in kind of the range of what was modeled for that.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what kind of chemicals are being used in your Scotch Creek for invasive things? Are there I'm guessing there's a lot of protections in place to make sure they can't get near water course?
Yeah, so the question was about chemicals being used to treat the invasive species, so herbicide. And I don't know the names of the chemicals right off the top of my head, but we are very strict on our application methods for local spot spraying away from streams and rivers on non-windy days. The conditions have to be absolutely perfect, and we use the absolute minimum amount of chemical necessary to do the job.
Question
Yeah.
from Emily Cooper, Hertel. It's great that Green Diamond is a partner in fish habitat restoration. Are there other collaborative efforts to do this in other areas of the tributary? Is Green Diamond willing to perform fish habitat restoration on their land?
Okay, so the question, and I'll try to reiterate that. Great that Green Diamond's a partner. Is restoration gonna happen in places other than the restoration footprints, and is Green Diamond willing to do restoration on their land?
Are there other collaborative efforts?
Other collaborative efforts. Okay, so the collaborative effort that I mentioned previously, to Mike's question about this K3RP group that's come together to identify restoration needs and prioritize them outside the restoration footprint is that collaborative effort. Green Diamond has allowed quite a bit of restoration on their properties. I can't really speak to it because I haven't done any of it, but Trout Unlimited does quite a bit of restoration work on the TU property. I'm sure there's some folks in here who are familiar with some other efforts. But so the short and long answer is yes to all the above.
Oh, Ken, you have your hand raised. You wanna unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I much appreciate all the great restoration work going on, and especially up here in Modoc Homelands at Topsy. I'm kind of I'm very much aware of the need to protect the restoration areas from potential vandalism and stuff. But any idea when we're going to be able to get back down to the river and watch the recovery? It's kind of a lot of opportunity to go see what's happening at Copco and Iron Gate, but not a whole lot at Topsy. When do you think we'll be able to get back down past the powerhouse?
So the access down past the powerhouse is squarely in the hands of the BLM. So keep reaching out to them, Ken. And then KRC has plans to open access to the Pioneer West recreation site by mid-June, once construction is finalized out there.
Yeah, BLM is saying it's pressure from res that has the Turtle Camp Road still closed. And so I guess I just wanted to speak up and remind folks that there are a lot of us who are just anxious to watch the recovery, not go down there and cut cookies in your restoration area. So thanks again for all the work that's going on.
Yeah, thanks for the input, Ken.
Dave, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.